Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. Again, if you're listening to the audio on the podcast players, which most people do, Apple or Podbean or whichever other podcast player, you've noticed ads by now. That is now bringing in money to support Geopolitics and Empire. A few people have complained. Others have said, if I have to sit through ads so Geopolitics and Empire can continue, no problem. And that is the attitude. I will look at tweaking the ad numbers to decrease them a bit. They're set on default, so bear with me. And as always, you can support Geopolitics and Empire by becoming a paid subscriber on the Substack, where I do a weekly news analysis and we do off-the-record Zoom calls with supporters. Returning to the podcast it's been too long. Vietnam veteran. I know he's a popular guest. When I mentioned to subscribers that he's coming back, people were like, "Yes, I was just thinking about Bob." He's an investor, author. I've got his books on Kindle, some physical copies. Bob Moriarty of 321gold.com. Welcome back, Bob.
Who are you again? You look familiar, but I'm not. What squadron were you in?
I think you give so many podcast interviews that you don't know who's who anymore.
I don't even know who I am anymore.
So, well, what squadron am I? I'm in the information guerrilla warfare unit. What so much is going on, Bob, and I thought maybe just starting with the economic, because your website 321gold.com, and so gold hitting records. What is that? Can you sort of break that down for us? What does that all mean?
Well, actually, that's a really good question. Gold has skyrocketed, and it's come very close to $4,400 an ounce last Thursday. It took a swan dive on Friday. The gold shares took a swan dive on Friday. And I'm climbing way out on a limb and carrying a chainsaw with me. I'm seeing signs of a temporary top. I think we're in for a correction. Frankly, and if you've read my books, I advocate buying when it's cheap and selling when it's expensive. And gold at $4,400 an ounce is expensive. I bought my first gold in 1967 or 1968, and I paid $35 or $36 for a $20 gold piece. It is up 125-fold since then. So if you compare the price of gold to postage stamps, to houses, to cars, to trophy wives, nothing that is real that has gone up 125-fold in 60 years. So I think that gold is expensive, but gold is the anti-dollar, and Trump's tariff tantrums and what's going on with the Chinese, what's going on in Ukraine, and so the EU wants to steal $400 billion from Russia, and they're saying they want to steal it to support Ukraine. But the fact is, the UK's bankrupt, Frank's bankrupt, Germany's bankrupt, and it's going to get worse. So we live in interesting times.
I was listening to a clip from Luke Groman this morning just before connecting with you, and he was saying something to the tune of, if when you see gold and the dollar rising together, that signals the end game. Do you think all of these records in gold and then silver shooting up and things like that, is that signaling that we're, how close are we to the end game, or is there still more runway left?
I think BNP Paribas gave us a signal today.
What would that be?
They dropped 10% this morning. It is the second largest bank in Europe. If you look at the whole if you look at everything, you've got a collapse of the Japanese bond market, you've got a collapse of the U.S. bond market, you've got the biggest financial players in Europe on the verge of bankruptcy. You've got the United States sending $40 billion to Argentina, and Argentina isn't the biggest basket case in South America. It's one of the better ones. You've got Ecuador attacking Colombia today. You've got a U.S. military task force in Puerto Rico prepared to attack either Venezuela or Cuba. So we've got some very dangerous things going on, all of which increases the chaos. And when you have an extremely chaotic situation, people want to head for the bunker. And right now they view gold as the bunker. But the problem with that is everybody views it as the bunker at the same time, and it's getting too crowded.
So if we try to extrapolate, as you just gave examples with the banking system, the markets, the bond market, as things begin to deteriorate, what do you think will be the coming steps? It seems like one thing is they're preparing a new system, which includes Bitcoin and stable coins and digital IDs and all that fun stuff. And another, it seems they're preparing for wars. So just further thoughts, what you see as next steps as we go into, this madness?
You're going to hate me for this.
I don't hate anyone.
I had all intentions of the world of sending this to you earlier so you would have a chance to digest it and we could discuss it intellectually. But I forgot. So I sent it to you 5 minutes before we started.
I think I saw Emmanuel Todd, right? I seen, I think a week ago, there's the Frenchman in China, Arnaud, I forget his last name, starts with a B, Bertraud or something. He often translates Emmanuel Todd's stuff, and there was a AI English dubbed translation of an interview Todd recently gave, and I caught 10-15 minutes of it where he's discussing the decline of the West. So I'm guessing that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something that I predicted. And frankly, I really admire Emmanuel Todd because he agrees with me. Okay. Nobody's talking about this, but clearly, if you step back and look at it, the decline in the US and the decline in Europe and the debt-based system of the West is catastrophic. The interesting thing is that both Russia and China has made it clear they understand what's going on, but the West doesn't. And you were talking about plans and cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and what governments are going to do. Do you know what unlimited power is?
We've seen it before in history, haven't we?
Well, actually, we have. I mean, you picked up on that, but you don't quite know where you've seen it. Who? Okay, if I gave you an envelope, and it was a piece of paper in the envelope, and it said that you could do something, and it was unlimited power, what would the piece of paper say?
I guess printing money, or...
Any fool could print money. They've been printing money for thousands of years. I mean, the Romans were absolute masters at it. But what is absolute power?
I don't know, when you get your hands on all the levers of control.
No, better.
I
You open the envelope, you pull out the piece of paper, and it says you have the right to go up to anybody you want to, pull out a gun and shoot them in the head, and we're not going to do anything to you. There is no power available bigger than that. Now, here's what's interesting and nobody thinks about. Who do we give unlimited power to?
I mean, isn't it basically? I'm just thinking of the latest example of Maduro and Venezuela, and I just yesterday, Richard Haas of Council on Foreign Relations was on NBC saying, "Yeah, we need to regime change Venezuela, like nothing." And
No,
no
no,
one's
no, no. Those guys are all pussies.
right, yeah.
Okay. They talk about it.
Are you talking about Washington
Okay. No, no.
or the East?
I'll give you a hint. We give it to 18-year-old kids.
The rifles when they sign up for war? I don't know.
Bingo. Okay. We take children. And when I was 18 years old, I wasn't a child, but I'm 79 now, so an 18-year-old is a child, but then so is a 30-year-old. But we give guns to children and tell them, go shoot that guy in the head. You get away with it. I was in Vietnam for 20 months, and there was one particular hill that we took 3 times. Now, we had B-52s. We had the USS New Jersey with 16-inch guns. We had cruisers. We had destroyers. We had artillery. We had F-4s. We had the biggest military in the world, and we had 549,000 American soldiers there running around shooting people who are not our enemy. And when we did the same thing 3 times during the 7-month period that I was flying the bird dog, I realized you can have unlimited power, but there are still limits to what you can accomplish. Now, if you look at Trump and you look at Macron and you look at Starmer and you look at Merz and you look at what's his goof that Koch had up in Ukraine, they all think we're going to do this and this and this and this, and this is what's going to happen. And they're wrong. They're totally, absolutely wrong. They don't have the power they think they have. Now, let's talk about this task force that's sitting in Puerto Rico right now. And I want you to pretend you are the commanding general or you're the admiral in charge of that task force. You've got a submarine, you've got 10 ships, you got 10,000 troops. Everybody's locked and loaded, and they're ready to go to war against Venezuela. You've got the CIA operating behind the scenes. What's your biggest problem?
Well, I was reading the other day, according to Venezuelan news, a lot of the Venezuelans, the support they have for their current government, or I don't know if you're referring to the allies of Venezuela.
No, it's worse than that. You know what the difference between being involved and being committed is? It's like the difference between ham and eggs. Okay, the chicken, she's involved. The pig, he's committed. Now, if you are the commanding officer of that particular force, you got to use it or lose it. You cannot sit there in Puerto Rico, okay? All those pilots are going to be out there chasing the hussies and drunk every night, okay? If you're ready to go to war, you got to go to war. And frankly, of all the stupid wars the United States has fought since World War II, I can't quite figure out what Venezuela did wrong, other than Trump doesn't like Maduro. But I don't like Maduro, but then I don't like Trump either. Okay. Would I go to war with either one of them? I don't think so. And this thing, the wild card that just happened today with Ecuador attacking a drug cartel in Colombia, I find that just wonderfully, wonderfully ironic. The same guy who is begging for the Nobel Peace Prize has got his thumb in another war.
Yeah, and then you're making me think of a clip just the other day. A commandant of U.S. Marine Corps, General Eric Smith, came out, and in a speech he said, "The next fight is coming. Trust me, it's coming." And I agree with your analysis. It's like they've got all those forces congregated, and it's like, I mean, either use them or don't. It's just for intimidation. And I get what you're saying about the European Brussels pathetic elites. But I'm just wondering if the U.S. is like a kid, and even though the stage is as you've described it, they're just going to go ahead and anyways and see what happens and pop off wars. So do you see them going forward, whether it's in Latin America or Ukraine? I think they're talking about a second meeting with Putin. Gaza has died down for the moment, but it seems like the Zionist desires to go after Iran, that they're just simply regrouping to come back for their attack on Iran. Uh-huh.
You have not been paying attention. What did Iran do today? Not yesterday. Today. What'd they do?
Well, you're further along in time than I am. I just woke up, so you're out there in Europe.
I'm just bored, silly. I'm stuck to my damn computer 22 hours a day. Iran came out and said, remember the nuclear non-proliferation treaty that we withdrew from because the United States tore it up? Well, roll it up and stick it where the sun doesn't shine, because we are no longer going to be bound by the agreement that we used to be bound with. And that is a giant FU to Israel and to the United States. Israel, the United States, and Iran are all playing a giant game of chicken. Nobody wants to be the first guy to shoot off his rifle. Everybody wants to wait until somebody else does, and then they can react. Now, when Israel attacked Iran a couple of months ago, they found out very quickly, gee, we're really used to murdering people in Gaza and the West Bank and Syria and Lebanon, but these guys shoot back. Iran is ready for war. Israel thinks they're ready for war. The United States has another armada sitting in Qatar right now. Same situation. You cannot send 40 or 50 airplanes over to Qatar, have them all locked and loaded, fueled up. Same thing with the pilots. I mean, I was a pilot. I know how that works. Okay. The pilots are out chasing pussies and getting drunk every night.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case.
So the question is, who starts it first? We got a pending war in Venezuela. We got a pending war in Ukraine. What is your take on the meeting between Zelensky and Trump last week?
Well, what I found was interesting was was it the Russian proposal for the was it connecting Russia and Alaska?
Now that's
and Trump asked Zelensky about it, and he wasn't very pleased. So,
well, I am reading. I have sources that tell me that Zelensky got his ass chewed. Okay, Zelensky's a cokehead. I mean, you cannot take anything that he said seriously. They lost the war, and they lost the war 2 weeks after it started. There isn't a chance in hell Ukraine could win that war. It was a total military disaster from the get-go. The Ukrainians have lost 1.7 million young men, and there was no reason whatsoever for them to die. The reason the UK, France, and Germany are all bankrupt is because of the sanctions against Russia, which backfired. And that's another perfect example of the United States thought it had total power, but it had limited power and it didn't know it. And now Trump has told Europe, okay, guys, here's the deal. Why don't you spend 5% of your budget on weapons and we'll sell them to you? And don't complain just because they don't work. They're the best we've got. And the Europeans said, sure, we'll do that. But they haven't got the money. And they are functionally bankrupt. There are rich people bailing out of the UK, bailing out of France, and bailing out of Germany as fast as they can hop on a bus. Because when you raise taxes, you eventually get to a point that every incremental increase in taxes decreases the total revenue that you take. And all three countries already passed that point. Now, strange enough, and this is a long introduction going back to Emmanuel Todd. Emmanuel Todd said the West is in a state of disintegrating. It is destroying itself, and it's absolutely true. And I don't read French, but I've given half a dozen copies of that book out to friends of mine who are French, and I've told them it's the most important thing they can know. The world is changing in ways people cannot understand today. And these are all little tiny pieces of the same pie. And the pie is a conflict between the debt-based system of the West and the resource-based system of the East to the South. And I see a lot of Americans who blame Russia, China, India, and Brazil for BRICS. But the fact is, all they are doing is responding to the West stealing $400 billion from Russia. The treasuries are trash, okay? So they're just protecting themselves, and that makes sense. And clearly, the Chinese and the Russians understand the West is collapsing. It's going to happen far faster than anybody knows. Do you remember that scene in Hemingway where a friend of his asked him, how do you go bankrupt? And the guy responds, gradually, and then suddenly, we're going to see a tipping point soon. And when I say soon, it could be literally days or weeks ahead. This thing about BNP Paribas, when the second biggest bank in France goes down 10% a day, you have a crisis.
Do you think such a crisis would, if it came so quick, that would prevent the West from launching a war? Because they'll need to concoct some false flag operation to sell to the masses as the raison d'etre to go fight the Chinese or whoever. And they're having a tough time. This pivot to Asia. They've been trying to create this Asian NATO. Almost every week I come across in the Western propaganda papers articles Council on Foreign Relations and others saying we need an Asian NATO, and they're not having, it seems, great success with AUKUS, which I view as a version of that. The staging in Australia for projection on China. So any further thoughts on China and what you're saying? It seems like what should be unnerving for the Western political elite is that it seems like Putin and Xi Jinping are extremely too calm, too quiet. Like they know what you're saying, and they're just waiting it out. And in the meantime, as you say, the Chinese are digitalizing and internationalizing the yuan, the gold exchanges. Everything's integrating. Even here in Latin America, the presence is increasing, and so they're moving along swimmingly. And so, just thoughts on China, the tariffs, and again Taiwan. And it's interesting. I always see in the Western papers they're talking about Taiwan, and it's almost as if the Pentagon, again, they need that pretext. They can't just go from nothing. And it's like they want China to go on Taiwan so they can say, aha, now we can come and attack you.
Exactly. But here's the problem. Okay. I joined the Marine Corps a week after I turned 18. I go through 13 or 14 weeks of boot camp, and then I go through 6 or 8 weeks of infantry training, and then I get accepted into flight training, and I go through 18 months of flight training, and then I go to an F4 squadron, and I'm in the squadron for 18 months. I joined the Marine Corps in 1964, and it took 4 years for me to be trained into all the nasty things I was going to do to the enemies of the United States. Now, while I was wasting 4 years of my life, what were the enemies of the United States doing?
They were also getting prepared. No?
They were doing the same thing. Okay, we got over there. Charlie was down there saying, okay, I got it. I've been at the rifle range for 14 months, and now I know how to shoot my AK-47. Okay, make it sound like an American, and I will shoot you. We forget that the enemy gets a vote. Do you remember the most famous quote from Lyndon Johnson about conflict?
Way before my time. I can't recall any quote from LBJ.
Okay. When you got them by the short and curlies, their hearts and minds will follow. Now, President Xi looked around at all his resources and say, okay, what could we do to grab these guys by the short and curlies? Somebody said, well, you've always got rare earths and magnets. So they said, we will only ship rare earths and magnets to people who have been approved. And if we ship them to India, they're not going to be allowed to transship those unless we have permission for the end user. Now, that is exactly what the United States did to China. So it's kind of a quid pro quo. You screw me and I'll screw you. The whole rare earths thing is, it's a funny use of the word, it's a Chinese fire drill. Because everybody thinks because it says rare earths that they're rare. They're not rare. They're very common. Now, to have a concentration of rare earths that's economic, that's a different situation. What is the critical issue with rare earths that every guy in the mining business understands, but if you're not in the mining business, you don't understand?
Well, I'm not in the mining business, so.
Exactly. Okay. Rare earths are not rare. However, rare earth processing is rare, and it's messy. And the Chinese are the only people willing to do it. So Trump is running around trying to do deals with Greenland and trying to do deals with Ukraine over rare earths. And the really funny thing is rare earths are all over the earth. I mean, there's simply no shortage of rare earths. There is a shortage of the facilities who can absolutely turn them into magnets. So the Chinese have grabbed the United States by the short and curlies, and the United States is beginning to realize, now, I didn't know this, but there was a Chinese chip company in the Netherlands that the Dutch government just seized. Now, the Netherlands doesn't produce a lot of chips. However, the Netherlands does produce the machines that make the chips, and the United States has demanded they restrict shipment of those to the Chinese. So there was a Chinese chip company in the Netherlands, and they make the chips that are used in automobiles. And the entire automobile industry in Europe is in a big panic now because the Dutch government has seized the factory and the production of the factory just went to zero. And you got to have those chips to put in cars. But it doesn't make any difference anyway because you need rare earth magnets. The only place you can get them is from China. The Chinese are pissed off because Netherlands seized the chip factory. And I'm going, these people are all crazy. Okay, these people are absolutely shithouse rat crazy. What are they doing this stuff for? China is not the enemy of the United States. China is not the enemy of Europe. Okay. What we need to do is we need to have some rational leaders who sit down and say, hey, we got to stop all that stupid stuff. And frankly, with one or two tiny exceptions in Europe, and you know who those are, the leaders in Europe are a bunch of chihuahuas.
Oh, I mean, myself as an EU citizen, I just cannot stomach looking at the faces of our unelected Fourth Reich apparatchiks. And I think that company you're referring to was Nexperia, if I remember. And, you know, some other interesting trends. We saw the Chinese jets that were supplied to Pakistan in the skirmish around Kashmir. And then I just read last week, Indonesia is going to be buying, was it Chinese J-10 jets?
J-7. J-7.
Yeah, and then there's those trends. And I'm just wondering, to what you were saying, there's just also this talk of the U.S. As you outlined, China has the capabilities, manufacturing, processing, all that in general, and there's all this talk of rebooting America's facilities. And you know, there's numbers like we saw last year. I think America produced 5 ships, and China 1,800. I was reading China, U.S. was looking at, because they don't have the shipbuilding ports capacity, so they were looking at buying one in South Korea. And so you think America will, before it's too late, they'll be able to reboot their economy? I don't know. I'm not seeing it. What do you think?
There is a chance. It's non-zero, but it's not up to 1%. They actually are cutting a deal with the South Koreans right now who build great ships. And the South Koreans are going to take over 2 shipbuilding factories here in the United States, and the South Koreans are going to teach the Americans to. All of these are long-term solutions, and the West is going to collapse a long time before any of that happens. I came to Europe for the first time in 1969. So I would have been 23 years old and went around Europe. And what do you suppose the primary transportation device was in Paris in 1969? It's 24 years after the war ended. How did people move around?
Their feet, bicycle, train?
Bicycles. And actually, and you mentioned trains, the train service was absolutely fabulous back then. It's still fabulous, but it was cheap back then, and it's not cheap anymore. But I came to Europe when I was 23, and then in 1980, I bought an airplane for an English guy who was rebuilding a farm near Biarritz. And I flew the airplane from the United States to Southampton, picked him up and his wife, and we flew to Biarritz. And we drove down to Spain. And the amazing thing about Spain was this 1980, the Civil War ended, I think, in 1936. So it would have been like 44 years after the Spanish Civil War ended. And there was nothing. There was no construction whatsoever. There were no new buildings. They had not recovered from the Spanish Civil War. If you imagine what Europe or what the United States is going to look like 10 years from now, it's going to look like Spain did in 1980. We have destroyed ourselves. Some of this stuff, if Donald Trump said, okay, I got $10 billion, go build a facility to process rare earth elements and produce magnets, it will still take 5 or 6 years, absolute minimum, to do that. And in 5 or 6 years, things are going to change. Everyone should try to read whatever they can from Emmanuel Todd, because he's identified the problem, and the problem is the debt-based system of the West is collapsing. And all these things that we're doing are accelerating it. Now, Trump clearly, absolutely made it clear to Zelensky that he had lost the war. And now Europe is stopping shipping arms to Ukraine. And it'll be obvious very, very soon, the next month or two, that Ukraine has lost the war. That's going to be a tremendous stain on the United States, who started the war in the first place in 2014.
And just on that point, the standard of living for the West, I talk a lot about this sort of neo-feudalism that we're headed into, and so it's a consequence of what you just described. But I also see it as something that the elites want. You know, the Larry Finks of the world, BlackRock, and we had just here in Mexico last week, Claudia Sheinbaum hosting in a big meeting, Larry Fink of BlackRock and Boris Brende of World Economic Forum, and it's like the vultures, circling, and so they're buying everything up. And churches here, even here in Mexico, I've heard recently that the tithing, the income that's coming in, is less, but it's because the population, the people, they're having less work, or the inflation is raging so high that they're having, just to survive, they can't tithe as much. And so it just feels like across from Europe to North America to parts of Latin America that it's just getting, for the average person, more difficult to survive. Thoughts on that? And then, what are some things people can do to keep the lights on?
Yeah, but here's what Larry Fink and BlackRock and all those clowns, Soros, all those people with money have confused having dollars with having cents. Okay, you can have lots of dollars and no cents whatsoever. And they're so used to just pulling the strings of their little puppets, they think they can do anything. BlackRock has bought big chunks of Ukraine. Well, I got some bad news. That's going to be about as valuable as a downtown lot in Gaza, okay? Because it's been flattened and there's no electricity and there's no running water. And they bought a pig in a poke. We need to go back. We need to look at history. What war did France get involved in that led directly to the French Revolution?
I'm drawing a blank right now.
The American Revolutionary War. They didn't have to get involved, but they wanted to give the finger to the British, who they've hated for centuries, okay? Without the aid of the French, the colonialists would have lost the war, period. Okay, we won the war because of France, but at the same time, it bankrupted France. So in 1789, there were 35,000 French aristocrats who were living off the peasants. The peasants in Paris couldn't afford to buy wheat because of the inflation. If that sounds familiar, there's a reason for it. So what did the peasants do? They do what peasants always do when there's too big a divide between the rich and the poor. And the divide in the United States between the oligarchs and average people is greater than it has ever been. And they are taking a larger and larger and larger share of the pie. But I said we need to look at history so we could figure out what the future is going to bring. Now, I told you there were 35,000 aristocrats in 1789. How many were there in 1800?
I guess much less, right?
3,500. Okay. They literally lost their heads. Now, these guys who have all this money, and it's obscene how wealthy the oligarchs are today, they're going to lose their heads because they're going to be targets. Okay. We're going to have a revolution. You've had guests who have made some really great comments. We've got a quasi civil war going on right now, but it's going to be kind of a combination between a revolution and a civil war. And I absolutely see it coming. I think this news today about BNP Paribas, I think that's far bigger news than anybody can realize. Big banks, these are multi-billion-dollar banks, do not drop 10% in a day unless there's some gigantic problem. So I think the changes are going to be far more massive and far bigger than anybody realized. But all these guys, these oligarchs, they got a big, nasty surprise coming.
Do you see something similar for Europe? I could see the same thing, that sort of revolution where the people get fed up. In Germany, deindustrializing so quickly and the economy collapsing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Europe has made so many mistakes. The system of government is Europe. In Europe is interesting because you've really got two independent governments. You've got the local, okay, the federal government of France, but then you've got the EU in Brussels at the same time. And both organizations raise taxes and make rules and make decisions. The interesting thing about the EU, when the citizens of France, Germany, Croatia, everybody in the EU, when they vote, they're not voting for the people who actually make the rules. All of the leaders of the EU in Brussels have been appointed. They weren't elected anything. I mean, that's like Kamala Harris. Do you know how many primaries Kamala Harris won when she was running for president? 0. Okay. She didn't get a single vote. And I see a lot of discord. I see a lot of shops shutting down in France. They've just gone to their 6th prime minister in less than 2 years. It's 5 people, but 6 prime ministers. They've got this unholy alliance where the Macron's party was able to stay in power because they got in bed with the socialists. And the issue had to do with the French right to retire at the age of 60. Now, somebody sent me a list, and it was a really interesting list. I wish I was organized, and I'm not. But it showed the relative financial status of people after they retire. And France was the only country in the world that people are financially better off after they retire because they've got their government provided pension. But at 60, everybody goes out and gets another job anyway. So the French are actually better off after they retire. Everybody else's income goes down. The French income goes up. And are they going to give that up voluntarily? No, not in lifetime. Is Social Security a Ponzi scheme?
Most definitely. And what bugs me now that I'm self-employed and reporting taxes as an American living in Mexico and a Mexican citizen as well, which shouldn't make any sense. I'm obligated to pay, I can't get out of it, the 12% Social Security tax for myself, which I'm probably never going to see. So.
You think? Okay. How do 100% of Ponzi schemes end?
In smoke and fire?
They collapse. They always collapse. Okay. It's false economics right from the get-go. And that's the situation the United States is in, Canada's in, Australia's in. Some of the numbers are so absurd when you think about it. 85% of Americans cannot afford the average new house. Now, wait a minute, okay? They gotta live somewhere, okay? And you've got BlackRock and Larry Fink and all those people buying up real estate, and they're gonna rent it to people. The whole World Economic Forum thing, I just love that quote. You're going to owe nothing. You're going to own nothing, and you're going to be happy, which just happens to be the motto of every slave in history. Okay. And the World Economic Forum is just, those people are insane. And they're not quite as powerful as they once were. But the elites would like to decrease the population. That's what the whole COVID thing was about. They're bound to try something else. Could well be because they want to start World War III, and clearly somebody does. Tucker Carlson, who goes a little bit off track now and then, had somebody on talking about nuclear weapons. And he said, when the first nuclear weapon goes off, doesn't make any difference who shoots it off, civilization will end. It will be over for human beings. And we're risking that on a daily basis, which is nothing short of insane.
And just to add to your previous point, I mean, here in Mexico, I just read in Mexico City, the average rent, when I first came to Mexico, I rented a 3-bedroom, small house for $200-300 a month as a single man. And now in Mexico City, average rent is like $1,100 a month, which is, it's getting on par with the US, which is absolutely insane. Not to mention is what you mentioned, the cost would be in the US. And just on your last point, I was going to ask you, I always ask you this question, and I know you're not, as you just said, you don't ascribe as much power to the BlackRocks, the World Economic Forums, and just to get your latest thoughts on some of the schemes they're trying to implement, as we saw in UK, Adolf Starmer, as I call him, or Keir Stalin, trying to implement the digital ID, saying, and I said from 2020, from the get-go, I said that COVID was all about partly what you said just now, but also about bringing in the global oligarchy, the digital technocracy, getting us used to QR codes and digital, COVID passes that you are mandatory for work. Where now you have Keir Starmer saying it's going to be mandatory for work to have a digital ID. Mexico just announced it, their biometric CURP, which is like their national ID. So you won't be able to work without your Mexican digital ID, or in the UK. And then they're doing this all over the place. Do you have any thoughts on these plans for technocracy across the planet when it comes, the digital IDs and CBDCs and stable coins and this and that?
Okay, you have a ton of books behind you. You clearly read a lot. Have you read The Great Taking?
I have the digital on my desktop. I haven't read it yet.
Do you know what the theme of The Great Taking is?
Right. They've set up the legal maneuvers to basically take all of our assets in this transition.
Yes, but that in the United States, this isn't a worldwide thing. It's in the United States. The Great Taking says When the banks collapse, we just seize all the assets and we give it to the banks. Okay, so you're at home. Okay, pretend you're living in Houston or Dallas or Fort Worth or LA. You're at home, sitting having a beer, having a good time, petting your dog, and it comes out on television. Okay, we've just seized your car and your house, and you don't own it anymore. You go to your closet and you open the closet, and what do you pull out?
Your AR-15.
Thank you. In a country of 400 million guns with 350 million people, do not steal their houses, their cars. Do not even try stealing their dog. Because if you do, you will learn what I learned when I grew up in Texas. An armed society is a polite society. Now, all of these guys have these plans, but these plans always fail. I love reading history about war because I participated in a war. And the more you read, the more you realize, God, those people were really, really stupid. Okay, I read something great today on unz.com, written by Ron UNZ, and he was talking about how Churchill was literally bought and paid for because he was a drunk, okay, who was financially irresponsible. So the people who funneled him money, he did whatever they wanted to, and he had a lot more to do starting World War II than people realize. And they were talking about assassination. Somebody said if somebody had assassinated Churchill, it would have saved tens of millions of lives. There is no such thing as a sane war. And nobody ever wins a war. And the article was very good because it pointed out that where in theory the United States and Britain run around acting like they won the war, first of all, they didn't win the war. The USSR killed 80% of the Germans. But the UK was bankrupt. My wife was born in 1944, and the UK was still on rations in 1954. Okay. 9 years after the war ended, the UK was still on rations, and it was a total basket case. Every civilization crashes when they get involved in military adventurism. And the United States is right there. We've got these just simply insane wars. The U.S. started the war in Ukraine. I don't even want to hear about how Russia invaded Ukraine because it's nonsense. The Minsk Agreement and the Minsk II Agreement both provided for self-determination. If there were provinces that wanted independence, all they had to do is vote, and they could be independent of the corrupt government running Kiev. Okay. And they, in fact, have had two votes, and in both situations, they voted to be part of Russia. So Russia did not invade Ukraine. Russia invaded provinces that had voted to be part of Russia. And they did that because they had been shelled for 12 years and were tired of getting shelled by an illegal government that didn't represent them. We have a lot of things in motion. What we don't have, clearly, we do not have leadership anywhere in the world that I can see. I'm just absolutely astounded at the idiotic things governments are doing. So that's a long answer to a short question. Starmer's going to fail. The United States is going to fail. CDC will fail. 15-minute cities will fail. The Great Taking will fail. And all of that is a good thing. because those are stupid things to do, and they're not what people are going to accept. And at the end of the day, people will fight back. And I see it in Europe. I see it in Madagascar. I see it in Indonesia. I see it in what country? Actually, there are riots in Ecuador. People are tired of being abused by the oligarchy, and everybody, the most favored site on the web now is a do-it-yourself kit for guillotine.
One of our listeners is out there in Ecuador. She's out in the rural area, probably not close to the action. So maybe we can get an update from her. But I was just going to say what you just said. As you're saying, revolution is coming. This is all a good thing, as that you've outlined, and I can't argue with your logic. Books behind me, the history has shown thus far that yes, they implement these tyrannical systems of empire, but they've all collapsed. And I guess the only bad thing is us having to power through some of this madness, dodge bullets, figuratively and literally in some cases. And so it was great to get an update from you, Bob. Anything else that we've missed that you think we should know about? Final thoughts?
I think, and well, no, okay, I'm either going to look real smart or I'm going to look real stupid, and we're going to know in a couple of days. I think we've started a correction in the metals. I think we've started a correction in the resource stocks. And I think the end of the line is coming for the absurdly overpriced stock market. And that will get everything moving. So it's a good time to educate yourself, and it's a good time to be especially prudent.
As always, your links are in the description. Where's the best place for people to find you, latest projects, books?
Right here, right here. I'm right here. I never go anywhere else. Right here at my desk, mainly. Oh, my books. Oh, shit. I'm glad you brought that up. I got some great books. They go to Amazon or they can go to Lulu and buy my books, or they can go to the website 321gold.com.
All right, and I've got where is it? Oh, I've got since last time. Here's the physical. No guts, no glory, right here in my hand. So.
There. I'm having a wrestling match with my dog. My dog is insane.
All right. Well, thank you, Bob. And people leave their comments here, and we'll have you back in the near future for another update.
That is, if you don't take another 3 months sabbatical, unpaid sabbatical.
You never know. I like to disappear. So
I'd like to eat.
That I can go fishing in the Adriatic. So
okay, my friend.